welcome to the REMOJO podcast. I'm Jack Jenkins, the founder and CEO of REMOJO, the world's only complete app-based program helping conscious adults quit porn. We're on a mission to help as many people as possible wake up, quit porn, and get a lust for life, and you can join the movement at remojo.com. That's remojo.com. I'm here today with my guest Jason Frost, who along with his wife Lisa launched their non-profit organization Wired Human to assist parents and professionals in empowering youth to thrive in the digital age and pursue a life full of community, adventure, and purpose. They've also written a book, The Glass Between Us, Empowering Youth to Combat Digital Exploitation, a value-based approach to screen-driven challenges, which is available on Amazon. Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Jack, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. So why don't we just start with a bit of background about you and just tell me a bit about like your story and how you got into starting this website, Wired Human, and writing the things that you're writing.
That is a great question. I'm going to try to keep it short because I can definitely go on a monologue here because it is quite a journey and a big piece of our lives. But Lisa and I have been working for nearly a decade with young people. And we basically had front row seats to really see how tech, especially when smartphones came into play, was affecting this generation's well-being, their mental health, and their relational connection to each other and to adults. And there was something, we just kept seeing scenarios that just felt really off. And I just remember one point I was at a particular school working with a certain client. I was an educational expert at the time working with a client that had some serious behavioral issues. And we were in a Sex 101 class that the religious education teacher put on. And one of the aspects of that class was that they mentioned that pornography is fake, it's not real. And so they took all these 11, 12, 13-year-olds at the end and brought them together. And they said, okay, what did you guys learn? And they said, oh, we knew all that already for a long time. I mean, they all had smartphones in their back pocket. But they said what we didn't know, and they were totally blown away, is that pornography was fake. And it kind of was like the light bulb went on my head. And then my wife is a teacher, and she had been telling me just the craziest stories of sexting scandals in the school with young teenagers and all these things. I mean, she had young kids at the age of 8 or 9 acting out a pornographic scene, thinking it was funny in the classroom and just wondering what is going on here, and just seeing the way it was affecting their ability to connect and their mental health. Something was off. So we went on a whole journey. We decided that we couldn't keep talking about the problem, but we really had to take a stand and become an active part of the solution. So I started a master's in international law. She started working on her PhD. And we really had this drive to try to understand the depths of the problem beyond just the surface of what we were seeing, but really dive deep. And I ended up writing my master thesis on children's rights and parental rights in the digital age, and writing a legal argument about how the way the porn industry and the tech industry is really set up in a way that it's violating the rights of children and their well-being, and it's trampling over the rights of parents to raise their kids successfully in the digital age. And that kind of sprung off the board of, let's just keep diving deeper. And we ended up spending about 3.5 years after that working on our book, The Glass Between Us, and creating a research-driven approach to this, because we realized if we're going to talk about sexuality, we're going to talk about this whole generation rising up and this huge problem that we see. It can't be opinion. It can't be emotionalism. It has to be powerfully grounded to the science that is out there. And as you know, Jack, and your company at REMOJO, there's a lot of science showing what this is doing to people of all ages, but how it particularly shows how it's affecting this young generation who's especially vulnerable to this topic was just egregious. And that's kind of, I guess, the baseline of where we started. And one thing led to the next. We launched the book, and we realized the message of the book and what we had, we really needed some hands and feet to go with that, to bring that out to the public. And that's where we launched Wired Human, to be those hands and feet, to go out and reach families, to reach professionals, anybody on the front lines working with youth. We call them the unsung heroes of our time, those mentors out there, that we want to support them and give them the tools they need to be successful in mentoring this generation back to health and a successful future.
Yeah, so you mentioned like the research or science that you wanted to take a science-based approach to this problem. I've been very focused in my work with REMOJO on really we're an app-based program for, as I said, conscious adults who've kind of woken up to the fact that this is causing them either some kind of harm, or it just doesn't align with their values, or they just don't feel good about it in some way, and they've woken up to that, and they're ready to quit. Where for those people. So I'm really focused on adults. I'm curious, like, what have you seen, and what are the kind of most interesting pieces of research that you've read, or that you are trying to raise awareness of, relating to young people and their exposure to this?
Yeah, I would say that's a great question. There's a lot of research, there are correlative studies showing how tech use and mental health are really connected together. But as you dive deeper and you get into the actual anatomy of the brain and the neuroscience of how we actually form behaviors and habits and how the reward system of the brain works, if you've ever read Gary Wilson's book, Your Brain on Porn, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. That it's for adults, it's already a huge problem because it creates addictive behaviors that actually destroy their sex lives later. Like Gabe Deem from Reboot Nation told me in an interview, he said, I was using pornography to become a sex god, and what I actually ended up is landing in a place where I was a libidoless zombie. And I think that was a great way that he summarized that up, is if you sit in front of kids and tell them, don't do it because it's wrong, it's kind of like a teenager that's like, yeah, but you're not cool. You're an adult, we know what we're doing. But if you say, hey, libidoless zombie, that is the ending point of this journey. So the porn industry is essentially coming in to your life, and it's pitching you something like a con to a mark, right? That they're the mark, and the porn industry is the big, is the con artist. They're telling you, hey, we're going to give you everything you want. This is going to be great. It's going to be awesome. Come on, come with us, do all this stuff, be involved in this stuff. But what they don't realize is that they're going to be eventually left with nothing in a desolate place of addiction, bondage, and the very thing they were chasing after is to understand their sexuality and build a healthy or like have an awesome sex life is actually ripped and stripped away from them, leaving them in a place of extreme anxiety and all these other things that we're seeing that's happening to this rising generation.
That's such a brilliant way of describing it. I hadn't heard that phrase, but yeah, that just completely and vividly captures exactly the state people end up in. And I think what we're trying to do is really about, basically people want a better sex life, and sometimes when they don't have that, they turn to porn as a solution to a problem, and in fact it just creates a new problem. The answer is really we're about trying to help people like turn away from that and actually get what they want and focus on real life. And they don't realize that, or many people don't realize that, the digital stuff will destroy your real sex life. It'll just take it over, essentially.
Absolutely. And yeah, I'm right on board with you guys. And I think the level that we're kind of, working with youth, the nuance that we're finding in this whole thing, and just you see a lot, I'm sure you've seen this, Jack. There's a lot of stuff out there. It's the 1, 2, 3 steps to solve your problem. If you have an addiction or your kids are struggling with digital entertainment compulsion and all this stuff. But really, there is a deep problem because this stuff isn't meeting people on the surface. These tech companies, so a parent gives a child a smartphone or a teenager, they don't realize that they're giving them a device that has access to this whole world that is designed by incredibly vicious businessmen, incredibly opportunistic business plans that are preying on fundamental human needs and desires, and it's backed by a multi-billion-dollar budget to get the psychology nailed down so perfectly that they don't stand a chance when they interact with these products without guidance, without mentorship, and without understanding the depths of themselves and where they're going in life. And I think as we approach this, we need to start looking at the issue slightly differently, is not just as much as trying to protect our kids from, or our teenagers, or even our young adults that we know, or ourselves for that matter, with trying to keep them safe. I think that's a really important topic. But what I see evolving on the other end in this tech omnipresent world is that we need to be empowering that they become the first line of defense against this stuff, that they actually are drawing from the depths inside of themselves. They're going as deep as the problem is, and they're going even deeper to have an answer to the problem that is has more authority than just trying to stay away from it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm really curious about your interactions with young people. I don't know what kind of age range you actually deal with. That I would kind of start there actually before I ask anything else. Like, what kind of age range are you and your wife typically dealing with and advising people on?
Typically, it's middle school to high school, people working in that age range and that developmental stage. But honestly, I mean, a lot of the stuff we talk about applies to young adults or young people in general, all the way from younger children all the way up to older people in their 20s. But I would say that if you were going to put the pinpoint on it, we're nailing down that sort of curious developmental stage of a middle school and high schooler, where they're, I would say, most vulnerable and have the mental capacities to be able to go into that world and explore it and find everything and experience everything. And they're wired to be that way. They're wired to be risk takers, to be explorative, to be curious, to get out there and find out who they are and their identity and that stuff. And yeah, so that's really the age range that I would say we nail down.
Okay. And like, how are people of this age actually responding to this message? Because personally, I have very little to no interaction with people in that age range. I'm basically living the life of, I'm 31 at the moment, and so living the life of a sort of 30-year-old single entrepreneur. So I just have very little interaction with children or young people at all. I'm just curious, like, how are they actually receiving your message? Are they like resistant? Are they open to it? When do you see their eyes light up? When do you see them glaze over?
That's a great question. So when you work with this, and it's probably true for everybody, but that we had to come up with a model to be able to speak into the hearts and minds, because what we're really seeing is that this is an attack ultimately on identity, and it's an indoctrination of values. So you have this massive multi-billion-dollar tech industry and all this stuff we're talking about here with pornography. There's a specific value system that is coming at them. It's capture their time, capture their attention, no matter what the cost, and monetize it. And it's then affecting their identity because it's putting things on top of them and then rewarding them with dopamine for what they're engaging in. So imagine it like and this is just kind of setting the backdrop, but imagine a young boy who's, let's say, 9 years old, stumbles across pornography. And as you know, Jack, he's not stumbling across sex. He's stumbling across exploitation, because the stuff that's out there is feeding people who've been addicted for 20 years and competing against their attention spans. So when a young youth encounters this stuff, they're seeing, incredible heinous acts of violence, of humiliation, of degradation against other human beings. But in the context of sex, the porn industry has designed their products to reward them with euphoria and dopamine reward, which is extremely confusing, because think about, you're 9 years old as a boy. You think, oh my goodness, I just saw this horrible thing, but here I am rewarded for that. I feel good. What do you come to the conclusion about yourself and who you are? Well, you might think that you're a horrible person. And we know criminals have done the same thing, that sexually abuse a victim. Oftentimes they'll look at those biological responses that victim has that they have no control over, that the way their brain is wired to respond when touched. And they point out those same things and say, hey, look, you're complicit. You're just like me. They go after the identity of the victim to make it easier for them to keep making those violations. And I see the porn industry is doing the same thing to an entire generation on a global scale. They are coming in, they're showing horrible things, they're breaking down identity, and they're indoctrinating these values in, deal with life with all the pleasure that we can give you at the cost of how you see yourself. And this generation is carrying this weight. So when we approach it, we have to realize you actually have to go to the depths of where this industry is actually attacking them, which is the core of their very being, of how they see themselves as a good man or a good woman. And we have a whole model of how we go about that called RUM, relationship, understanding, mentorship, and boundaries. And that would be a little long to go into the whole thing in depth. But essentially the goal is that you want to build an open door to have a meaningful mentorship relationship. And like you said, they glaze over when you have a conversation, because maybe you haven't spent the time and the relationship and the understanding with them in order to earn that right to speak into those areas. So they just glaze over and they don't want to hear. But really, I think this generation, until you speak so loudly with your actions and the time you spend with youth that you care, they won't open the door to their hearts to receive the words you have as life on their lives, if that makes sense. So everything about us has to show that we care first, that what matters to them is important to me, and what's important to them matters to me, to build that connection, to have that deeper level conversation.
That's interesting. And if this is not too personal, if it is, we can skip over it. But how has that gone with maybe your own children? I know you and Lisa have several children, and I assume that you're applying everything that you're teaching within your own family. So how can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. It is a learning process, and we by far and large don't nail it every time. We try our best, but being able to handle life and all the stresses of work and all the things that we're trying to do, and then at the same time not push our kids to the side at times where they don't feel like that they're number one in our lives, and they don't feel that my actions are always communicating that I care and I love them. It's a total journey for me, to learn. Like, I know what the right answer is, but I feel like, more often than not, if you're just trying to choose love and you're trying to work that into the way you interact with your kids, it covers a whole mess of mistakes that I personally make along the way. But I do know, I'll give you an example. We did a 30-day digital reset adventure on the Appalachian Trail to promote a new campaign we're doing, which is to unplug from tech post-COVID and help our kids rewire their brains to be able to receive mentorship. Like, you just got to go through this step of just unplugging all our bad habits that we sort of gave up on during COVID and let them run wild. And during that process, I had a moment on the trail with my son where he just had a meltdown, didn't want to go any further. And I sat down and I was trying to tell him all the reasons why we need to keep going. There was a thunderstorm coming. It was going to get dark. We needed to get to our campsite. We're in the back country, 30 miles from anything, of civilization. None of that worked until I literally sat down and started making farting sounds and making him laugh hysterically and being a total goofball. And I realized in that moment that for kids, just connecting at their level and meeting them where they're at is so much more important when it comes to mentorship than trying to give them all the wisdom right in their face. They won't receive it.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask about this sort of adventure that you went on with the family, right? So you did this 30-day digital reset. How did it actually go? I'm curious. Just like, what was the experience like? I guess for you, maybe for you and your wife. Did you learn anything? Did you experience anything like unexpected?
Yeah, we experienced plenty of unexpected. It was every day. That things don't always go according to plan. You're carrying. I mean, for myself, I was carrying a lot of the weight. And my son already weighs almost 50 pounds, and he was in a backpack when it would get too hard. So the normal backpacker carries about between 29 and 35 pounds, on average. And I think I had a load that was about 165 pounds and a little cart that I was trailing behind me to make it work. But so the experience, I'll just cut to the end of it. My wife, it was deeply humbling. We wrote this book on technology about protecting ourselves, about, knowing who we are, what we're about, where we're going, and plugging tech into that. And here I am on the Appalachian Trail, and I just realized after 3 weeks, I felt my brain unclog from the news. I felt it unclog from Netflix. I felt it unclog from Amazon Prime Video, like all the things that I was like, oh, these are just normal, fun things to do, which they are. But I just realized that it was also stealing other things from me, my ability to read, like books that I love or spend more time with my family. And my wife made a comment that was deeply humbling. She said, I feel like I got my husband back at the end of this adventure. And I was like, wow, if I, who wrote this book or with my wife and I wrote this book together and been so intentional about understanding this for the past 6-7 years, and that's the result of going on a 30-day digital reset for me. I'm like, what could this mean for a whole generation of youth and their families if they did something similar, not on the Appalachian Trail, but at home in their house and went on a similar journey of unplugging from tech? Because when you strip everything away and it's just relationship and it's just people and it's just the world around you, the physical world, you really get to see what's left in your life. You get to see what's actually built, what you've actually invested in people. There's no distractions.
Yeah. Yeah, because in a way you spend, in the digital world, we spend a lot of time essentially just living in a mirage, right? And it's almost impossible to untangle that from what's you. In the REMOJO course, we have like one sort of short recording about trying to unpick what's truly you and what are your true inclinations versus conditioning. And I think like I don't know how old you are, but I think like I said, I'm 31, and I think anyone my age or older has kind of been fortunate enough to have grown up without really getting a smartphone. I think I got a pretty decent phone at about 14, but I was by no means hooked on it, and you couldn't do anywhere near as much on that kind of thing on one of those phones as you can now. And so I think I only really got what looks like a modern smartphone around 19, 20. So, and obviously then the last 10 years been living in a somewhat different world as things have really taken shape, Me and a friend were mentioning about who lives with me here in London, we're talking about how much life has changed from when we first moved to London at 21 after university versus now at 31. It's like a lot of the things that we count on every single day or several times a week just didn't even exist 10 years ago. You didn't have Uber or delivery services, or like I don't think Netflix even really existed. A lot of other kind of services. So we've been fortunate to grow up without that and have a sense of what life was like before these things, before social media. I can remember being invited to Facebook when I was 18. Like, my children will not have that luxury. They'll be on social media, as soon as their friends start inviting them, probably like 5, 6, whatever, if I give them a smartphone. I'm not sure about that. What do you think about, did you have any kind of experience, going back to your wife's comment, of kind of untangling or unpicking things that were you versus maybe something that had been conditioned by technology in a way?
Absolutely. I think what I realized with myself, I was extremely intentional in my life about avoiding pornography, understanding where that all led really well, and also not being super involved on social media outside of work things. And I fortunately don't have a gaming system. That might be an issue in my life because video games are captivating. Like it's a world unto itself. But the way I was using it to really deal with anxiety and stress and the hardships of life and tiredness as a parent. Like, you just go all day long and your life is about everybody else, and you hit the end of the day and you're tired. And instead of reading a book or connecting with my wife or even just being in my own thoughts, instantly my phone would come out. And the other thing is, it's not just at night, it was during the gaps of all the day. Uh, whether it was coming home or having a second to sit down, like, I just found it was so easy to get that dopamine tickle from my phone of constantly checking things and seeing, even with work stuff, just seeing like, oh, did we sell some books today? Or, oh, did this work out today? Or, oh, what's the news going on today? Or what's the latest drama? And pulling that away, I think I just realized that I didn't have an ability to reflect inside of myself. So being on the trail after that 30 days, I felt very clear about myself and being able to understand my emotions and what was going inside of me, because they weren't constantly being dulled by tech. But also my relationships with my kids greatly improved. I just realized that there was a lot of missed opportunities to apply that action of love in their lives, of showing them that I care. And I think a child, one of the greatest ways we can show them we care is to give them our attention. You don't have to do it right. You don't have to spend money. It really, like, you don't have to have this big overarching thing that you do with them. It just can be as simple as just acknowledging their existence right in front of you and not being distracted. Mm-hmm. And so all of that coming together, I just felt freed up in a lot of ways, but I also felt what a challenge it was to protect that when we came back after 30 days. And definitely realizing slipping back into old habits was a little scary at times, and trying to create that accountability to keep fighting for something more, because we're all learning this together. The digital age, none of us are true experts on it, because it's really just come at this level that we experience the internet is something new for all of us, and we're all trying to figure it out together.
Yeah, I think I think being present with people has always been extremely powerful, and really listening. What I'm finding now is that it's almost like a superpower, because I'm quite present and quite a good listener, and now it differentiates you from almost everyone now. And I can only imagine kids or young people like growing up with constant access to smartphones, whatever. I imagine there must be a difference in how present they are and their ability to be present and listen to people. I'd be shocked if there wasn't. I don't know, like, what you're finding there.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that they're finding through empathy studies is that kids are really struggling in relationships to have the proper empathy, because a lot of what they're experiencing online is indirect communication. And so everything is like, they don't see how their words hurt somebody. They don't see what they said. They don't get that initial reaction to learn the proper social skills. If you say something, you make someone cry. We all remember doing that as a kid, and you're like, oh, that didn't feel good. But they never actually learn that, because they never see it in their digital world. So when I talk to interview teachers, I always love to ask this question: what's your greatest challenge in the classroom right now? And they always, I've always got pretty much the same answer: is kids don't know how to relate to each other these days. And I thought, wow, like, really? Yeah, that's obviously my own experience with teachers. Yeah. But this is going to be the next generation of kids taking on the jobs and solving the world's problems. So if we're not acknowledging it now, and it's not their fault, they were born into the world we created for them. So there's an element of responsibility that we have, that we got to step up our game as mentors, as leaders, to really see what's coming down the pike and get in front of it before it turns into a disaster later.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I'm a little bit concerned about the future, about what happens when, because certainly, obviously, with REMOJO, we're going to be around, helping, because the problem's only going to get worse, essentially, before it gets better. So there's going to be, all sort of future generations, until governments step in, are going to grow up on porn, essentially, as well as other like digital addictions. But I'm a little bit concerned about what happens to the world and society when the proportion of people that have grown up in the digital world increases and becomes like the majority or the vast majority. I mean, given what you've seen in your reading of the literature, which I haven't engaged with so much, in terms of things like empathy studies in young people. Are you concerned, and what are you scared or worried?
That is
Based on
such
what
a
you've seen.
that's such a great question. I mean, that's the reason we're doing what we're doing, as you summarized it, is that we see the youth and young people in general as the future of our world tomorrow, and and they're going to solve the problems. And what I see is as on one side, yeah, it is scary, and that's what drives us to get in front of this. But I actually I have so much hope for this generation, and even people who are in college. Like I feel like there is so much hope in the sense that if we get this right as leaders and mentors right now, and if this generation gets this right now, it's going to be the greatest generation I think that we have ever seen. It's going to be like that World War II generation that overcame the most incredible challenges of their time and became a force of nature when they entered back into the real world to see, the whole society rise up to a new level. And I think the same thing is happening in this battle of pixels over people and valuing people over tech, that if we help teens, and think of it this way, if a young person understands so well that they can be confronted with the temptation of pornography and say, this is not who I am, this is not what I'm about, and this is not where I'm going with my life, that intentionality, that inner maturity, that inner armor inside of them is going to make them a force of nature when they hit their adult years and take on the challenges of our time. And I think that's the invitation here. Are we willing to rise up as mentors to be the greatest generation of mentors, to lead this generation, to become the greatest generation of youth to solve the problems of tomorrow? And I think it's absolutely possible, because I think this generation is incredible. They just need us to really step up and start giving them the tools and guidance. And I know you asked me earlier, like, how are kids responding to this? They're responding, when we talk about this stuff with them, with relief, because parents generally don't want to enter that world with them. They don't want to talk about it. And the amount of weight that they are carrying is crushing. And that's in the United States between 2014 and 17. I believe that the life expectancy in the States started to decline, and that is unheard of for a country like America, to be this, this big economic machine and have all these resources here for people. And why are people dying statistically sooner? Well, it wasn't old people dying younger. It was young people choosing to end their lives. So what we need to recognize is that we, as this current generation and leadership positions, have an invitation to meet youth where they're at and provide a guidance for them to rise up to meet the challenge of this time. And if we get that right, we're going to change the world.
That's really crazy. So before I pick up on something else that you mentioned, I just wanted to say is that there are so many suicides that it's actually bringing the average life expectancy down.
Yeah, between 2014 and 17, the life expectancy was going down, and they found that it was young people that were ending their lives that were affecting those statistics.
Wow. Yeah, I'd never heard that. That's really crazy. But going back to what you're saying about that invitation that you're making to young people, it's funny because I feel like with REMOJO, we're making exactly the same invitation to adults. It's just that, in a way, getting really hooked on porn is kind of means that you haven't really matured yet into a fully sort of conscious adult. And so generally we're catching people at the tipping point there, and actually making that very same invitation about stepping into the person you could be. And a lot of our users basically, they're just starting to get a sense of who they could be, and they just realize that they feel like quitting this is the first step on the journey, and they also just know that their best possible self just can't be doing that. It's just obvious. So it's funny because you're talking about exactly the same thing. I just think that, like, people aren't necessarily maturing until 25. They're still actually living in some ways as a child, or unconsciously, probably because I don't know what you would say about the US education system, but in the UK, there's there's still very, very, very little emphasis on actual life skills and preparing you to be a successful person. They prepare you to be successful in exams in all kinds of different topics. Maths, English, history, biology, whatever. You can sort of regurgitate facts and solve math problems and things like that. But there's still, as far as I'm aware, very, very little on just all the things that you actually need to succeed as an adult human being taught. I don't know, like, how you feel like the US education system is doing in that regard.
Oh, totally. I think we're outdated in so many ways, and tech definitely exposes us for that. And I think it's most apparent in the school system because we have a system that has been essentially pretty much the same for a very long time, all the way back. I mean, probably back to the 60s and 70s. And I know that different schools in different states in the United States have all different approaches and different, private and public. But in general, this whole idea of preparing kids and teens to actually take on what the challenge of the world is bringing towards them, there's a huge incoherency between what they're learning in school and what they're experiencing in the world. And I think technology companies right now, you have the productivity side of tech that's amazing, but the entertainment side of tech is taking advantage of that, with reckless abandon, coming into every American family's home on a global scale in the UK, and kind of determining, in our silence and education and in home, they're saying, well, we'll tell them what we think, and here's what we think. Come give us your time and attention, and we'll monetize that and make ourselves trillionaires. So yeah, I see the same thing, and I think it needs to be something that is just absolutely standard to go over. Living in the digital age and a tech omnipresent world needs to be fundamental to education and raising up this generation, both in the family home and in school.
Yeah, I saw, related to that, I saw on your website, and you kind of mentioned this question, right? So on your website, it says, how can we raise teens to value people over pixels? What do you think is the answer there? What have you found so far? Because I think it's the same question we have with REMOJO as well. How can we teach adults or help adults value people over pixels? So I'm curious what you think.
That's a book in itself. I think that what you just mentioned, you could put a title on that and write 20 chapters. But I'll give you what my short answer would be on that is the wiring of the brain becomes the playbook of the heart. What we thread our brains to online will eventually become how we live and love offline. So when I think of that, I realize that in order to speak to this generation, we really have to go deep and help them understand what's happening and what's being taken from them, and give them those experiences in the real world to be able to feel the benefit of true connection, of true authentic adventure, of living life to its fullest outside of a screen, and also educating on how that screen can be a tool in their lives to launch them towards their goals and the things they want in life, but it's not the end goal in itself. And that's the problem. The screen has become the end goal in itself. So we did a lot of research on happiness, and I don't know if you've heard of the Grant study, but I found that extremely interesting. No. It followed a group of Harvard, I think it was like freshmen or sophomores, I think former editor of the Washington Post was in it. JFK was also one of the Harvard students that they followed, but they basically went through the course of their life and looked at what the single most important aspect of life is to produce happiness and success. And that was our connection to other people, our connection, and it was a caring connection. It was how we felt cared by people and how we were able to care for others. Essentially, how we're able to let love in and how we're able to let love back out. And I haven't read some studies that said that if you were going to look at smoking, drinking alcohol, IQ, all these different types of factors, well, we'll go like being obese, not exercising, like all these different factors, and compare that to the power of a relationship and our ability to connect to other people. They found that people who smoked and didn't exercise and were basically the world's worst couch potato could live longer than somebody who didn't have a caring connection to the people around them. And that tells you everything. So I think if we could really help teens understand at an academic level how important people are in their lives and that authentic connection, and where the shortfalls of tech cannot actually recreate the human experience in the real world to its fullest. But at the same time, like, they need to understand, but they need to feel it at a heart level, right? So we need to give them those experiences in the real world. And it's about how we structure our families and what we value in our families. Do we value people over maybe career and over our own technology habits and different things? Like, how does that reflect? Because sometimes we have, especially in America, we just get isolated. We get all about career. We get all about our sort of our own siloed world. And we come home to our castle and we just sit at home all day and just operate out of this very so narrow system that we actually don't value people as the number one in our lives. And you can see how that's affecting depression. And we always say tech is like pouring gasoline on the fire of this problem. It just makes it blaze.
Yeah, I think the core of what you said is absolutely spot on. It's like you can't rationally persuade someone. You can only persuade them to try it, and then when they try it, they feel they suddenly can experience what it's like and compare the two ways of living, or you get those kind of deep realizations about what you've been missing out on, or how your day-to-day interaction with technology is actually affecting you. And it's just very, very difficult to articulate that, and in a persuasive way, other than through experience. I think that's absolutely right. I think that even just taking small breaks or changing certain things, it can be quite amazing what even like a couple of days can do. So you actually do you have any kind of experiences that you try and promote for young people? Like, how can they sort of experience that?
Yeah, definitely. I think authentic adventure is a great place to start. And that would be, I feel like, it's sort of a call to action of the adult leaders in these teens' lives, because they're operating in the system that we present them. And so if we're not valuing relationships as number one as a family, but also as a community together, then teens are going to be so much more vulnerable to looking to tech to try to fill those fundamental human needs. So we need to create access points for that to happen. And whether that's making your house the life of the party, like, do you need to have a house that you prep 3 days to make everything perfect for your neighbors to come over? Or is it just okay to be you and have a little mess around, but just be a place where community can happen, be a place with an open door, and start being more invested in your neighborhood community around you to create those natural access points to happen. And I would also say that I don't think any teenager is quite as happy and fulfilled as when they're serving others. And no teenager would admit that. In fact, if you brought up volunteering or any of that stuff, they'd probably roll their eyes. But they love to feel like they can make an impact. They love to experience the community of making that impact. And I think a great way to also get teens and even yourself is to go look for something that's bigger than yourself, where you feel like that in you're operating in this moment completely opposite of what the value system of tech is. Because the value system is tech is all about self-indulgence. It's all about pleasing yourself, making yourself look good, having your experience, having your mountain that everybody gets to see. And when you start focusing on other people and making them the center of your attention, that's actually where happiness is experienced, is giving to others. And I think teenagers I've never seen them more happy than when they go out and volunteer and do something or help somebody or be a positive influence in somebody else's life that builds into their mental health and their sense of belonging in this community.
Yeah. So with Wired Human, who are you finding are your allies in this movement? I'm curious, like, where are you finding the most traction in terms of getting supporters, donations? You know, who's sort of most ready and willing to help and join the cause?
We have had incredible support from the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. NCOSE has been amazing, and they're in Washington D.C. and their mission is to end all exploitation. But they're definitely very active in this field as well of being focused on protecting youth and kids from everything we've been talking about. So they've been in a huge support to us, and we have always just been amazed by the impact and the drive that they have to make positive change, and they're influencing systems and doing all kinds of cool stuff. But as a community, a grassroots level, we are somewhat new as a nonprofit and building that traction. But what is really cool is that everybody comes around the idea of raising up this generation and making them successful and protecting them from those things that we all agree upon that are very destructive, that we're seeing through social media and gaming, compulsion, addiction, and especially pornography, exploitive pornography. Well, all pornography I see is exploitive. And I found it amazing that all religious institutions, secular institutions, volunteer programs, like, we have had support from all corners. I mean, even our book and the message, we had a Democratic congressman and a Republican congressman endorse our work. We've had people on the liberal side of the academic spectrum and the conservative side of the academic spectrum endorse our work. And we've had people from all types of activist communities and also religious institutions endorse what we're doing, because I think we all see the same thing. It's a huge problem. This is something that needs to change, and we all care about kids. So hopefully that if we get this right as a community, it will actually heal the divide that we see as a nation here in the United States especially, but maybe as a global community, that we could come together and find something that brings us to the table together to solve this problem and hopefully see each other's humanity in that at the same time. I mean, that would be my dream, is that solving this problem is a way to actually bring communities together that never would have seen each other, because the tech industry is going after every socioeconomic group. They're going after every culture, race, gender. It doesn't matter. They're after everybody's time and attention. So that just means that we're all in this together, and we're all part of solving this together as a grassroots community movement.
Yeah. So your book, you say a value-based approach to screen-driven challenges. What does a value-based approach actually mean from your perspective?
That's a great question. Well, when we talk about, like, okay, so where are we going with our lives? Like, I think that's a big question that we have to have with youth and teens, is like, what do they actually want out of life? You know, do they want a happy, healthy relationships that's full of trust, great sex, and a family one day? Like, I think a lot of teenagers or kids would say, yeah, we want these great things. We want a successful career. And the question is, what is going to drive us there? And our values, we're finding, are the driving force of our life that really, it's sort of the rudder of our ship. It keeps us on target to where we actually want to go. And I would probably say, in your experience, you've seen this with all these men out there that have dreams, have ambitions, they want something, but they've aligned with a value system that steered them off course and shipwrecked them on a bed of rocks, like whether that's porn addiction or something else. And so we really want to challenge this young generation that mentors, if you follow this RUM model of relationship and understanding, that you build that door to talk about values as an integral part of your actual identity, that it's your go-to response when you're confronted with life. Like, if you're bored, if you're anxious, if you're stressed, what's your snap-to response to that? And that should be governed by the values that have your absolute committed yes. And if we're not clear about that, the value system of the tech industry comes in and just sort of takes on that indoctrination, just subconsciously plants that in this generation's brain of self-indulgence, living for the next kick of dopamine, which actually isn't going to take them to the place they want to land.
Yeah. And what do you think, maybe, are there any sort of key values that you feel are sort of universally helpful, or do you try and help kids really find meaningful values? Or do you feel like, or some kind of hybrid between the two?
That's a great question. We're a little careful about suggesting actual, like, say, this is the values you should live your life by, because I think that's a sacred sort of discussion with somebody who's already really invested in that teenager's life or that youth's life, like a parent or a trusted teacher or a professional of some kind that has put the blood, sweat, and tears in. But we do have a list on our website of like courage and and commitment and responsibility and trust and all these different things for values that people can look at to get inspired by. But ultimately, it's in the journey of the discussion. So, like, one of the things I love to suggest to parents with young kids, like maybe middle school or even high school, is watch a movie of your favorite superhero, like Iron Man, for example. I love Iron Man because he's a nuanced character. He's good, but he's also kind of like, a little like not always nailing it in life. But it's cool because you can see values that drive him to do really incredible stuff in life, to be the hero, to save the day, to be selfless at times, and how that equates to the success. But you also see very tangibly the values in his, like, that are portrayed through his character that steer him off course, that lead him to depression, that almost defeat him because he's falling into those traps. So that's a great, like, baseline, like, to do with somebody to have a fun conversation about values. But ultimately, that I think the key is that teens and kids in general recognize that the internet is loaded with a very, very convincing value system that is constantly bombarding them. And if they're not loud about their own values, that loudness of the internet will eventually take over the space. And that is where we run into problems, where we start headed down a road that leads us to addiction and bondage. So I think it's super critical that we build those connections and relationships with this rising generation that allow us to start discussing the values that are driving us in life, that are keeping us on track towards our goals. And that's why we always say it's not a 1, 2, 3 solution to the problem. It's a life journey that we're committed to going on with this generation and revisiting these topics, that they have that knowledge and skills to be able to tackle this problem at the depths of where the problem is actually found in their hearts and minds.
Yeah, and what are you and Lisa working on right now? What's sort of coming up or in the pipeline? What kind of projects have you got going on?
That's a great question. Right now, because we just finished our 30-day digital reset challenge on the Appalachian Trail, we are turning that into our second book. And it's going to be, where the first book was research and story driven. This book is going to be very, very, very practical. And we tried to make our, the glass between us has a lot of practical stuff in it. Like, we have these things called rum challenges, and we have questions after every chapter. But we really want to create something even that just goes that step deeper of just, this is like the nuts and bolts of what you guys can do as parents, as leaders, as any professional working with youth, to start making an impact right now today in your own home, in your own classroom. And we really see that as actually challenging families and communities to take the 30-day digital reset challenge, not on the Appalachian Trail, because that was for crazy people like us, but to do it in your own home, in your own environment that makes sense to you in a meaningful way. So that's one project we're working on, and we're building traction on. We see it as a grassroots movement, so we're also working on getting a pilot program together to get parents to meet in regular small groups to start discussing together with sort of a guidance aspect to that. Basically, what's going on in their homes, what's going on in their classrooms, what they're seeing in the professional world with youth, and sharing resources and getting direction. So we're trying to kind of develop a 10-week course for them to go through together, but mostly kind of a guided course where they get tools, but hopefully are able to support each other and come up with solutions together. And lastly, I think this year we're hoping that at the end of the year we could launch a curriculum that anybody, like youth pastors or schools, public or private, would be able to take that curriculum and plug it into whatever they're doing to start making this a conversation with youth and start waking this generation up to what's happening and how they're actually being exploited without realizing it, and where that's going to take them and land them, and give them the tools they need to be empowered to know who they are, what they're about, and where they're going in life, so they actually can rise to the occasion to plow a new path forward.
Yeah, and so I know we mentioned a few ways that people can engage with you at the top of the podcast, but what would you kind of say, where should people find out more about your work, get involved, support, learn more? Where would you tell people to go?
Absolutely. Well, first is our website, wiredhuman.org, and we are a nonprofit 501c3. So we do, at this point, everything we do is funded by people who believe in what we're doing and want to see it happen. And your support basically is the engine that keeps this thing going. So that's huge. If people want to check out our work and see what we're about, and even consider donating, would help to keep us to be able to produce these tools for parents and keep the fight going. The other one is we are on Instagram. Our handle is We Are Wired Human, and that basically is just updates. We try as hard as we can to create content that gives back. We're all about producing. Everything we do on there is to give you something that you can walk away with and think, oh, I have a little tool for today, or I have a bit of encouragement for today to take on this fight. And we're also on Facebook under the same handle, We Are Wired Human. So if you wanted to look us up on social media and reach out. And I think our favorite thing to do is we love to interact as a community. So we always encourage people to say, please message us. If you have questions, we would love to talk to you. We're all about this community engagement and taking the time to really meet parents in the depths of this problem to make them feel hopeful and successful in raising up this generation.
Cool. Well, Jason, I really, really enjoyed the conversation. Like, a few things that you said actually still, even though I've been working in this kind of area and thinking about these problems for a year and a half, 2 years, some of the things you said actually hit quite deep, and I felt quite inspired at different times just hearing you talk. So yeah, really appreciate having you on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Jack. I really appreciate the invitation to be here, and we love the work that REMOJO is doing. And I think a lot of the values that you guys apply to what you're doing and how you're creating your products to help people, we align with those same values of community and tackling this together. So we're cheering you guys on as well.
Yeah, we're on the good guys side. I think everyone wants us to win in the long run, so we're on the right track. Jason, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Jack.